Okay, Dinah, you got your green button. All right, Gavin, good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Terumos Daf Halacha Aleph and Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Lamed Dalid. We left off on Daf Lamed Dalid, Amud Aleph, second line from the top of the Amud. I want to point out that even though we just read the top line, my Kedoin and the Gemara explained, as we'll review, the Sheniskan Rubai Shalkiri, we will follow those who take out the next 4 or 5 words, and we're starting today from the Plukta de Chizkiya of Rabbi Yechanan. So where are we up to? So first of all, we had in the Mishnah the din of the Tanakama, which is that when a person is mafresh mixas truma, and when he had in mind, the example we gave is that he had a pile of 100 saw, so he has to take off 2 saw. He only took off 1 for whatever reason, and while he took off the 1, he had in mind that he will be taking off the second one. So since he had that in mind from the outset, we consider the separation of 1 and the next separation of the final one to be one long separation that only goes into effect at the end of it, which is really what happens every time you're mafresh trumos, which means until the end of the separation, everything in the pile is still tevel. And that's why when you're being mafresh from the pile for the pile, you are allowed to take the second saw. We don't say, you're not taking tevel, you're taking tevel and chulin, or you're taking chulin, because it really, everything is tevel until you finished the halachic 1 hafrasha. That was the way the Gemara began to explain it. We proved that L'Reish Lakish, that explanation, he for sure did not learn the Mishnah that way. He couldn't have. If he would have had, then he wouldn't have said the din that we said yesterday. We're not going to repeat that. So in other words, we extrapolated from a certain ruling that he gave that he learned the Mishnah completely different, and what we concluded to at the top of Daf Lamed Dalid is that this is the way he learned the Mishnah. That a person, same thing, you're being mafresh, not 2 saw, you did it 1 part and then the second part. 1 part Sunday and the next part Monday. It can be on the same day, it wasn't at the same time. But instead of it being 1 saw and the second saw, no. When he was mafresh, the first hafrasha, he took off the majority of the 2%. And therefore what? It goes into effect. But since it goes into effect, what's the result of that? That in the remaining pile of 99, the majority was mesukin, and only a minority is tevel. Reish Lakish will subscribe to the opinion that biblically, tevel is nullified like almost everything else, prohibited, it's nullified if it's mixed, beroiv of something permitted, batal beroiv. Which would mean that mida ayraisa, you b'chlal don't have to take a second separation. Everything is okay. If someone were to eat from the pile, he's not going to be chayv misa b'dei shamayim, biblically. But midrabanan, as we said yesterday, because of the rule that kol davar sheyesh lo matirin is not going to be nullified, so the Chachamim demand for the person to complete the hafrasha. But that's only a rabbinic obligation. So what? Midrabanan, you could be mafresh. Now, why don't we say that when you're taking off the let's say the quarter of the saw, you're taking it from a mixture? That's a halacha. That halachically we are allowed to say that since in the pile some of it is still rabbinic tevel, so we can say that when you take whatever the remaining amount needed, the Torah says, halacha says, review it that you took it from the tevel. But when it comes to being mafresh from this pile for another pile, the other pile is tevel midoy raisa. Why does the Tanakama say you're not allowed to do that? I'll tell you why. Because this is only obliged to be tithed midrabanan. Means midoy raisa, it's completely exempt. You cannot be mafresh min aptur ala chiyuv. What we did not explain yesterday is that how would Rav Meir then, how would you understand Pshat in Rav Meir when he says, according to Reish Lakish, the case is that you took off, the first hafrasha was the majority. Well, is it not batal beroiv? Is it only a chiyuv midrabanan? How could you be mafresh for another pile? So we're going to see that today. Even though the Gemara does not address Rav Meir today, but as we'll see soon, that one can argue that not only midrabanan is there no bitul beroiv, that we'll see there is a svara to say that even midoy raisa, tevel, will never be batul. And we'll see inside the logic for that. And that, by the way, will also be the rationale behind the way that Shlakish will understand the Shita of Rabbi Meir. Now, what we didn't yet learn inside, even though we said it right from the outset when we learned the Mishnah 2 daf ago, and that is that our Mishnah only brings 2 opinions, the Chachamim and Rabbi Meir. Lenient, even more lenient. You could be mafresh for the pile, the Chachamim, just not for another pile. Rav Meir says, no, you can take from this, from it, for something else. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that's brought in the Braisa, holds that once you separated miktsas, you ruined it. You cannot take anything from it, not even for the pile. So we're going to learn Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and based on the Shlakish's understanding of the Mishnah, we're going to bring that to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and there's going to be some inquiries in how would we understand Lidei Shlakish, the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and that will conclude the sugya of Halacha Aleph, somewhere in Daf Lamed Daled Amid Beis, and then we'll start today the second Mishnah of the 4th chapter. Second Mishnah of the 4th chapter is going to introduce, or it's going to help us review the law of Bereira. Now, Bereira, Aviv, comes up throughout the entire Shas. The word Bereira literally means retroactive clarification, as we'll give an example when we'll learn the Mishnah. And there's a machlokes in the Mishnah, basically, whether biblically we ascribe or subscribe to the principle of Bereira, or whether we do not subscribe to the principle of Bereira. As we'll leave it like that because it's a little bit late, and we'll learn the application of it when we learn it inside. Just for the record, we paskin that for rabbinic law we say Bereira, for biblical law we do not. Okay, Daf Lamed Daled Amid Aleph. Again, we are going to be skipping. We left off at the end of the top line. We didn't read the final word. We're not going to read it. In other words, the words Loi Niskan Rubei Shel Kri is something that we will omit from our Girsa. And now the Gemara says that you should know that this explanation of Reish Lakish, which explains that if a person separated from the beginning, not one saw, not one of the 2%, but he separated more than 1%, in other words, he separated roiv of what needs to be separated, midoi raisa, that's the premise. You don't have to do anything anymore, because midoi raisa, the remaining tevel in the pile, is batal beroiv. Says the Gemara, not everyone agrees to that. That this is really a plukta of Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan. And that's, you see, Reish Lakish l'shitasai, like we just mentioned, that tevel will be batal beroiv. His shita does not need any explanation because he's saying the rule. The rule is, chavra, that something prohibited is batal beroiv. That's the rule. However, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, ein hatevel batal beroiv. Now, like we mentioned, first of all, that will be, even Lidei Shlakish, that will be the way Reish Lakish understands Rabbi Meir, who says that you can remove from this pile even for another pile. The other pile is tevel midoi raisa. It must be that this pile is also tevel midoi raisa. Why? Because there is a logic to say that tevel will never be null. The question is why? Why not? Listen to the words, and then you have to know how to learn pshat in the words. Bekiven shenasan datei lahafresh nistaima kol chita v'chita b'mekayma. Now, the word nistaima means it's discernible. The law of discernible is something that no one debates, which is simple. If something prohibited then gets mixed in something permitted, the ratio is roiv. I'll tell you, the ratio is 1,000 of permitted against 1 prohibited. What is the law if you can discern, if you can identify the prohibited? You see it. It will never be nullified, just to make that clear. The whole idea of bittul is only because it's a mixture that you don't know what is what. Since you don't know, you have a doubt. So what is it? What's this one? I'm going to say it's from the roiv. Once you know what things are, it's not called mixed. First of all, Pashit, you know the famous story, I think it was with Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, that when he was very young, he was like a child prodigy, and one of the big rulers, the Goyim, called him in, and he liked talking to him. So one of the things the king or the count asked him is, doesn't the Torah say you follow the majority? Yeah. The majority of the people that live here, he told them, are Jews or Christians? He said, they're Christians, or Catholics, whatever they were. So he tells him, why wouldn't you therefore have to follow the majority? To which he responded, you only follow the majority if you have a doubt. I have no doubt that we have the truth. If there's no doubt, you don't follow the majority. In other words, if something is discernible, it's discernible. You're good. Now, why would we say tevel is discernible? That's something that Rabbi Yochanan did not word. That's why it's difficult to understand how they worded things if we're learning the right pshat in the words of Rabbi Yochanan. And we're going to say that since when tevel is mixed into chulin, you can always rectify the tevel. How? How can you rectify? You don't even know where it is. By being mafresh truma mimake macher. That's the way some understand pshat and Rabbi Yochanan. So it's not physically discernible, but it's resolvable, which really that would mean it's a davar sheyesh le'matirin. I'm just opening up a Pandora's box. But we're going to go with the pshat. Clearly, Rabbi Yochanan is saying tevel is never batel. Why is it not batel? He says because you can see where it is. You can't see where it is. You don't know what's chul and what's tevel. It's as if you can see where it is. When you see the davar ha'asur, what do? You remove it. Why would you say bittul? Remove it. Even though begashmiyus you don't see the tevel, you remove it. It's removable. How can you remove it? Tevel is easy. Tevel is not something that remains asur forever. Tevel is only prohibited prior to you separating the maisris. Now, again, when you have a mixture, I understand that there is an argument to be made that you cannot fix it from it. Because when you take something out, you don't know whether you're removing tevel. Only tevel can become truma. Whether you're removing chulin. So what? Even lachatchila, min hamukav. Take other product that's vaday tevel and say that you're being mafresh from the other vaday tevel for here, wherever the tevel is. No, it's basically the way we are learning pshat and Rabbi Yochanan is that a davar sheyesh le'matirin is not batel midorais. And that's the logic. The logic is fix it. By the way, there are two davar sheyesh le'matirins. There's a davar sheyesh le'matirin which now it's vaday yasur. At some point later, it will be mutter. That's one type of davar sheyesh le'matirin. Then you have a davar sheyesh le'matirin like tevel. It could become mutter right now. Who told you it's asur? It's only asur because you didn't tithe it. Separate the tithings. And for that, you don't have to see where it is. So it's as if you know. It's as if it's a davar mesuyim. Nestaima kol chita v'chita b'mekayma. Okay.
Is that the explanation of his words?
That's the way Rab Chaim Kanievsky understood pshat in his words, and that's not unique. You should understand that in Yerushalmi many times we're just taking it for granted. Again, we have the art scroll, we have the Oiz V'Hadar. That a lot of work was done over here. We can see why people had a hard time learning the Yerushalmi. You didn't know the right girsa. It's very hard to understand from the way they worded things. They had a different way of wording things. The Yerushalmis. Yakir would understand. I think you have to be from Israel to understand what they're saying. They generally are saying, what they're saying is vaday, not what they're saying. They're saying something else. You just have to know what the something else is. Okay. So now, says the Gemara, now that we brought this logic of Reish Lakish, whether we subscribe to him or not, Rabbi Yochanan argues, now let's go introduce the third opinion that's not brought in the Mishnah. There is the Boya Meimar. Some bring or they make relevant this conversation between Reish Lakish b'Shem Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, not only or not b'chlal on the Mishnah, but this is a conversation to be had on Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? We learned in the Brayso the Tani. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that when you come to this hamafresh mixas first, however you learn pshat and mixas, and then you want to be mafresh the rest later. So the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says you cannot do anything. Let's go back to the issue. The issue is that you rectified part of the pile, right, Aviv? Part of the pile is tevel, part of the pile is chulin. When you take a new separation, you're aiming to hit the 2%, but when you take it out of the pile, who said what you have in your hand is only the tevel? Maybe what you have in the hand is tevel and chulin. Maybe only chulin. Chulin is already exempt. Chulin can never become truma. And therefore, ein moitzi, lo ya'alav, and certainly not al makem acher. No, these are the words of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Now, what is the case that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is referring to? Now it's beautiful. At Kedoin, perhaps, where does Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say such a chamurdik opinion that you can't even use the remaining pile to rectify itself? That's only if the initial rectification, if the mitzvahs that you were mafresh on Sunday was not the majority, was max 50%. At Kedoin is if loy niskan rubei shel kri. We are asking what would be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov if a person was not mafresh the whole 2% at one go, which is the normal way you do it. Okay, you were mafresh it part and part, but what were to happen if the first part was the majority? If we're going to learn pshat of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that he's referring to the case not of Reish Lakish, not the way Reish Lakish learned the Mishnah, but the way we learned the Mishnah. Now let's ask L'shitas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov what were to happen if you were mafresh roiv. That's a lot better. Why is it a lot better? In other words, perhaps here Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov will rule leniently based on this discussion, which is, since you were mafresh roiv, biblically there's no obligation to tithe. Elama, there's an obligation midrabanan. Maybe since the obligation is only rabbinic, we will allow ourselves to say that when you remove the second hafrasha, which will be in the minority, you are removing it from the rabbinic tevel. Maybe, in other words, that's the beauty. Daf lamed dalid amid beis.
Rabbi, could you say the second obligation by rabbanan is almost like you're volunteering more than you need to?
You're volunteering more than you need to. We're not saying that. You are not volunteering more than you need to, Kevin. The question is, can we start saying the leniency that we just mentioned? Okay, so Zok the Gemara that v'yeva kahada, in order to know the right understanding of the shita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Daf lamed daled amid beis, let's bring another question that was asked. And then typical, you're going to answer this question with nachakash, which is, hoy lefanav shnei kiroyin. If a person has in front of him 2 piles of produce, and what did he do? This genius, let's go to the numbers. Every pile was 100 sa. And this guy removed from pile number 1 only part, the case of the Mishnah. He removed from pile number 2 only part. Let's go lechachamim, the Tanakam of our Mishnah, that you are allowed to finalize each pile by removing the remaining necessary for it, but not for the other. Could you maybe over here remove from one to the other? It's when you have a pile that had mixas, truma, mufrash mimenu, and you have another pile that's legamrei tevel. That is where the Chachamim say that you cannot take from the one that already is partially rectified for the other pile that's b'chlal not rectified. That's the Mishnah. What would be the din if you have 2 piles that each one of them is partially rectified? Maybe they should be viewed as a single pile because they share the same status, and therefore they wanted to know in the yeshiva, maybe you can be lenient, maybe we will be allowed to be mafresh from one pile even for the other. Let's read it inside. And the other one was the same. So the question is, perhaps even Latanakama. Here we will view both piles as a single pile, and thus you will be allowed to be mafresh from one even for the other. You get it? Simple. That was the question. And the Gemara says that who asked that question specifically? Maybe the whole Chevra had that question, but then they wanted to bring it to the one who knows the answer. So Talmidoi, the Rab Chia Ruba, invite him in the Yerushalmi, he's called the Great Rab Chia. Sho'alin, he brought this question to Rab Chia Ruba, to which Rab Chia Ruba responded, and it's not clear what he meant. We'll see the 2 options, and he quoted the pasuk. We had this pasuk not long ago from Koheles, said by Shlomo HaMelech, that Hakesil, the fool, one of the definitions of the fool is Choyvek es Yadav, that he folds his hands. That's an expression, almost literally, the fool doesn't work, folds his hands, and then Nebach, he doesn't have what to eat, so he has to eat up his own flesh. In other words, it's an expression of Shlomo HaMelech that you have to face the consequence of your foolish choices. And then don't complain that you folded your hands, you don't have what to eat. Now, what did he mean by giving that answer? What was understood from Rab Chia is that, first of all, Rab Chia bar Yaakov subscribes to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who's the most stringent of opinions, which basically says that if you don't be mafresh mixas, once you separate part, like someone was asking yesterday, why would you do it? You don't stop, do it, don't do it, or do it. Don't do it half a haircut. Don't do that. And he says, once you did that, you can't. Now, there is a solution by finding other tevel. I know that. But maybe the guy doesn't own it. It just gives a big headache. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that things as they are, you're stuck. You cannot rectify it. They understood Rab Chia Ruba to be answering that you cannot, the guy that get fool. You have two piles, you're stuck with both piles. In other words, you're asking whether you can use one for the other. Forget about using one for the other. You can't even use one for itself. Okay, if this is what he meant, Aleph Beis. Aleph, he paskins like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. But hold on. If we're going to say that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's stringency is only when you were mafresh up until 50%. But if you were mafresh more than 50%, in the case of the way the Shlakish explained, if we were to say that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov there would allow us to be lenient, then Rab Chia Ruba should not have quoted that pasuk categorically, saying that the guy is a fool and there's nothing he can do, because then there would be a case where there's something that he could do. Let's read it inside. No, the Gemara doesn't even explain it. You have to understand it yourself. The fact that Rab Chia Ruba says, you're a fool, there's nothing you can do, and he did not limit his stringency, is a raya that Rab Chia Ruba is saying that there's nothing you can ever do. Meaning that even if the hafrashas of mixas, the first, was roiv, still Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov will hold that you cannot separate from the pile on itself. Like Rabbi Yochanan, that we just learned, or like Rabbi Meir, the concept that tevel is not batel. There's no bittul beroiv. Number one. Number two, since there's
still fixable.
From some, yes, that we know. Okay, that is no debate. That is no debate. No, it's the fact that we understood Rab Chia Ruba to be saying, forget about separating one from the other. You can't even separate one for itself. When someone is asking a halachic question, you are obligated to give more details, to say, well, depends. How much was the first hafrasha? The fact that he didn't say it, again, is a raya. That's a raya from this understanding that according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we make no difference. Tevel is not batel, like Rabbi Yochanan. And by the way, it's good, we just mentioned yesterday that there's we have this general rule, Reish Lakish against Rabbi Yochanan, aside of 3 cases, we always paskin like Rabbi Yochanan. So it's good we follow Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara says, if you have the right story, maybe you have the story wrong. Rabbi Eliezer says, B'Shem Rab Chia Ruba, Ein Tormim v'loy ma'asrem izel zeh. Rab Chia Ruba did not say the pasuk that there's nothing you can do. No. Rab Chia Ruba actually paskin like the Chachamim. Now, Rab Chia paskening like the Chachamim doesn't shed any light as what would be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Just want to make it clear. It does shed light. Same logic, that since Rab Chia Ruba, who's giving a psak, and he's basically saying, you can't separate from one pile for the other, but you could separate from one pile on itself. The fact that Rab Chia Ruba did not say, that depends. If he would have learned like Reish Lakish, then Rab Chia Ruba would have said, and even for itself, it's only if the first hafrasha was roiv. If the first hafrasha was not roiv, then you can't. He didn't say that. No, it's clearly that Rab Chia Ruba understood the Mishnah not the way Reish Lakish understood it, not the way we have it on Daf Lamed Daled, the way we had it on Daf Lamed Gimel, the way we learned yesterday. It's not about bittul beroiv. It's not about bittul beroiv. It's considered one long hafrasha. But don't forget, that was not the inquiry. The inquiry that we started at the end of Daf Lamed Daled in the bottom is, what is the shita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? if Rabbi Chia Ruba doesn't even paskin like him, so then there's nothing we can learn from Rabbi Chia Ruba that would shed light lishitas bishitas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So the question is unanswered. So depending at what version of the response of Rabbi Chia Ruba is, accordingly you'll have a clarity bishitas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, or you won't. You won't know how far is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov machmer. Beautiful. It's very open-ended. Yes.
But how is Rabbi Chia Ruba passing like a chacham? Because Rabbi Eliezer says something in his name.
No. What do you mean? No.
Want to repeat the question?
No. They asked. They had a question in the yeshiva. Two piles that have the same status.
Yeah, but then afterwards it says Rabbi Eliezer b'shem.
No, that's Rabbi Eliezer is an Amoira. This Rabbi Eliezer b'shem Rabbi Chia Ruba is not Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov.
Oh,
Many generations later, correct. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is a Tana, and this Rabbi Eliezer b'shem Rabbi Chia Ruba is another rabbi that lived many years later from a different era who had the same name, and not even Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Okay.
But then what's this puzzle coming to?
He didn't say this. He didn't even say this pasuk regarding this case.
Didn't?
That's what we're saying. There are two versions as to what he said.
Oh, wait, we can't hear his questions. I'm sorry.
It's okay. And he has great questions, but we have to move on. Okay, and for that you have to come live. If you come live, you hear Aviv's questions. If you come on Zoom, one of the penalties you pay is you cannot hear Aviv's questions when we're using a different machine. I'm so happy.
Then we can record it, Rabbi.
This is so good that this machine is working.
Aviv needs a mic.
Aviv needs a mic. Okay, we'll get him a mic. We'll have two mics over here. Okay, Chavra, moving on. Perek Revi, halacha beis. This is great. I want to give just one thing in the Mishnah that we have to understand on our own. Whenever the Mishnah speaks about someone who's separating Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani, it's taken as a given, almost in all cases, is that the Truma was already resolved. And I want to tell you even more when we learned Mesechtas Demai, right? When the Chachamim made a takana that if you buy produce from an Amma Aretz, one thing we learned right away, Truma Gedoyla, everyone separated. This is the case of our Mishnah. Person has produce, the Truma Gedoyla, which was the most serious of all separations, prior to which your Chayv Misa B'dei Shamayim was resolved. Now a person has a very large pile, and now they know they have to still separate Meiser Rishon. The Mishnah's case is when we are in the 3rd or in the 6th year of the 7-year cycle, in which after Meiser Rishon you don't separate Meiser Sheni, but you have to separate Meiser Ani. And listen to what happened. Mi shahoya peiroisav b'megura. Person had produce in the storeroom, a lot of produce. And he didn't even count yet. He doesn't even know there's a lot. A practical case. A Levi is walking by. I'm the owner. I'm separating. I'm observant. I'm going to be doing it anyways. I'm estimating. I can't estimate, but I'm estimating. There's going to be 10 saw to the Levi. No, there's a lot of produce. For sure, I'll have to separate one saw. The Levi is walking by, and I say, you know what? I want to give one saw to the Levi. So I gave the Levi one saw for my sedition. V'nasan saw ben Levi. Then an ani walked by, and I gave another saw to an ani. I just want to, for the record, really, let's go from every 10. How much would you end up giving? From 10, you would give 10% to the Levi, but then you would have 9 left. Really, what would you give after you gave the one to the Levi? How much would you give Aviv? 0.9. Just for the record, when the Mishnah says Usa La'ani, it doesn't mean he gave extra. It's common. He gave 0.9, but for the point the Mishnah wants to make, many times we round up the number just so it should be easier. He gave the right amounts. It's really, he didn't give a saw, he gave a 0.9. He gave 9/10. Doesn't matter. Point is, in the Megura, in your storage room, you have a lot. But how much did you rectify when you gave 1 and 1? 10. Not 10. Why not 10? You're right, but you're wrong. Why not 10? Because when you have 10, 8, I know it's not 8, it's 8.1, right? But we're rounding up, we're rounding down. So I know now that from my big storage room in which I can have a lot, 8 I already covered. Says the Mishnah, Mafresh oich shumayna so in va'oichlon. I am, and these are the words of Rabbi Meir, I have a carte blanche to take out of my megura. The Truma Gedola was already dealt with, Vadai. I can take 8 saw and eat it. What's the Chiddush? Must be what were to happen if the saw that I gave to the Levi was already consumed. It's not here anymore, doesn't exist. The saw that you gave to the Ani doesn't exist. I never had 10 from which I says, for this, I'm separating to the Levi. That's not what happened. I'm having a credit. I know that I will have to give a nice amount. Let me chaparain, now that the Levi is here, I gave him 1. Let me chaparain and give the Ani. Now, one might have argued that for me to take 8 and for me to link the 8 with the 2, they both have to exist. Because normally it all exists. If I do it the normal way, I know what I have. From it, I say, oh, don't forget, my set has to be exact. From the 10, I'm giving 1. Now, if the Levi eats it, of course I can eat the remaining. I don't need for the Levi's 1 to be in the world when I'm going to eat the remaining. But when I make the link between that which is gifted and that which is remaining, at that moment, everything is in front of me. That's not what happened over here. Here the guy preempted 1 and 1. He knows that he can take 8. What were to happen if when he takes the 8 and he's making this declaration, for this 8, really, I'm connecting it to the 1 and the 1. The 1 and the 1 were consumed already. Rav Meir is saying that it does not need to exist. The 2 doesn't have to exist. At any point later, I can take the 8, no matter what. The Chachamim are the ones that says that Einoi Mafresh Elo Lefi Cheshboin, the way we will learn Pshat, that only if the 2 still exist, then I can say, yeah, I gave 1, there's 1 that's in the hands of the Levi, that 1 is being misak in this. The other 1 in the Ani is fully being misak in this. But if they already ate half, let's say if they each one ate half of what they received, then I can only be mafresh 4 and link it to that half. What's the underlying logic between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim? The din of Bereira. One thing is for sure, guys, when I removed the 1 from my megura, from my storage room, everything was there. The 1 that I removed was there, the remaining was there. What's the issue? The issue is that when I removed the 1, it wasn't clear at that time, what am I being misaken? I didn't clarify that. I was actually giving it as credit. When did I make that clarification? When later I removed 8, right? The concept of Bereira means now that I removed 8, we are allowed to say that retroactively clarifies that when I removed the 1 to the Levi and the other 1 to the Ani, it was always meant for these 8. From then it existed. When I removed it, everything was there. You with me? Chachamim say that there is no retroactive clarification. I get it. I can anticipate credit. But when I take the 8, the 2 that I gave, which I have to give, have to exist. They don't have to exist with me. They can be in the hands of the Levi, who can be in the other end of the world, but it has to exist. Can be in the hands of the Ani anywhere, but it has to exist. It only is effective mikano lahaba, Bereira or no Bereira. Yeah, beautiful.
Just to clarify, this situation involves there being more than the amount that's being rectified.
Very good. The Gabi is saying good, because if there would anyways only be 8, then there's nothing that has to be clarified. It means even though a person should give ma'aser exact, and this genius did not count, turned out there was only 10 to begin with. Then Vadai, when he gave it to the Levi, it was only for this, because there was only this. That's why the Mishnah uses the words that you have it b'megura. In other words, we were trying to emphasize that the amount that this guy will have to give is huge. It for sure has 8. not 10, you have a 200, forget about 10. You're giving one saw to the Levi, one saw to the Ani. The says Rav Meir, perfect. At any time later, you take 8, and you say that retroactively, when I gave a month ago, or yesterday, I don't care when, that one to the Ani, it was for these 8. It was for these. Now, where else do we have the dinim of Bereira? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar, again, the Amoira. The Gemara is Amoiraim, Yaviv. Rabbi Lazar, in the name of Rabbi Shaya, says that the Chachamim in our Mishnah that do not subscribe to the din of Bereira, this is similar to the opinion that we find in a Mishnah, Mesachtes Demai. The Mishnah over there is speaking about the rule that I don't know if it's Mesachtes Demai. Let me just go back. Yes, it is. We're speaking about a chaver who's a worker, who's working for the employer that has the status of an Amma Aretz. And the worker gets some of his salary by the product that he's working with. The example the Mishnah there gives is that he's getting figs. Being that it has a din of Demai, now I'm not going to go into the whole details, but some of the Trumos Maisres rabbinically has to be separated. There the Mishnah is also speaking about the concept of a worker, even prior to getting his portion as a salary, even prior to that, he already separated the Demai separations. He did it in the morning. So like this, by lunchtime, when the worker is going to give him a certain amount of produce as a salary, he wants to then say, oh, I already in the morning separated the Demai separations. It's mamash a similar case with one huge difference. The whole separation of Demai is midrabanan. And like we spoke out in the words of introduction, and that's the halachim, that when it comes to dinei derabanan, we do subscribe to Bereira. Let me give you the classic case where we say that by rabbinic law we say Bereira. The classic case is like this, by Eruvet Chumen, which is something, even nowadays, if you're not living in the city, people in the East Coast, I mentioned that they go to the Catskills over summer, they have to make Eruvet Chumen. People over here that go to Big Bear, not that many people, they have to make Eruvet, you have to know what you're doing over there. So what's Eruvet Tchumim? Let's go, Aviv, it's very practical. The Tchum of Shabbos of 2,000 Amma is not that much. It's not that much. It's something that we are able to walk. So let's say you have a cabin, and you have, to the north, you have a shtibel, but it's not 2,000 Ammas away, it's 3,000 Ammas away, which there is a solution. In other words, you can only walk 2,000 Ammas. Okay, go in between you and that shul. Place before Shabbos, it should be bein hashmashos, halachically, the amount of food that has to be there. And it's keilu, you were shoyvis in the place of your food. And now you begin measuring the 2,000 Ammas from the Eruv that you left in the north. Thing is that there's another shul in the south. And that's the case that the Mishnah gives, you want to allow yourself the luxury to decide Shabbos morning what shul you want to daven in. So what you're doing is, you're putting an Eruv in the north. There's another shul to the south, also 3,000 Ammas away. You're putting an Eruv in between you and that shtibel, and that shul. You get it? Now, you cannot place two Eruv in. It doesn't work that way. You can only be kind of your shvis of Shabbos in one location. So this person is saying, okay, I'm putting 2 meals, one here, one there, and tomorrow morning, Shabbos morning, I'm going to decide which shul I want to go to. If you subscribe to Bereira, which is retroactive clarification, then it went into effect because the Eruv has to be there from Bein Hashmashos. Even though you're making the decision Shabbos morning, those who subscribe to Bereira say that you can do that, and we paskin that way, and I can decide Shabbos. You know what? I want to go to the darshan in the north, to the cholent in the south. You are allowed to do that, and that's the halacha. So coming back over here, it's very similar to the Demai. In the case over there that the Gemara is quoting, the worker is preempting the Demai rabbinic separations, and what did we say? That osu oisa kapoyel she'enoi mamin lebal habayis. This actually follows the sheet of Rabbi Meir, and you can do that. And later, when the poyel is getting the case there, he's getting paid 100. He's getting 100 figs a day. He already got tithed figs. He didn't tithe it when he got it. He tithed it before he got it. He gave himself credit, and we don't care if that which he gave is be'en or not. Says the Gemara. Okay. Again, the chiddush here is that we are linking the Rabbanan with the Doiraisa, which is taka the whole point. The point is that Rabbi Meir subscribes to the din of Breira even where there is a biblical obligation, which is the case of Trumas U'Maisris, and it's the same thing, we have the din of Breira. Now, Zok the Gemara, Pshit Adom Milsa, Chavre Daf Lamed Hey, we got 2 minutes. Nisr for HaPeiros. Listen to this. You separated, preempted Truma or Maisris. Here, the Gemara is already going to Truma. Same thing with Truma. You anticipated Truma. And what happened was, not the Truma got burnt. Before you identified what part of the Megura produce is to be linked with the Truma, before you made that identification, the produce got burnt. It's not Vakasha. Is the Truma? I separated Truma. Truma has to be for something. I didn't identify the something yet. By the time later I want to identify the something, and for the record, even according to the Chachamim, that you don't say Breira, but if the Truma is Be'en and the other remaining is Be'en, you can make the link later. But by the time you want to make the link, the remaining produce got burnt. You know what happens? The Truma is Betela. Since the remaining 8, let me give the case of the Mishnah. Since the 8 was never identified, and now that you want to make the identification, it's no longer in the world, it got destroyed. So then the separation of my sedition is never a separation. Aber Nisrfa Truma. But if the Truma got burned, now you want to identify the produce for which the Truma was Mesakein. This is the case of our Mishnah. And what we are saying, according to Rabbi Meir, that you could make that identification later. That L'chsheyachlu ha'peiros katra ha'truma lamafrei are obviously according to Rabbi Meir, which is Gavaldik. No, it's even according to Rabbi Meir. You know what Breira means? Breira means that at a later point, we go back retroactive. If you never made it to the later point, there's no retroactive. That's Vadai. That's what's amazing. You have to have a moment where you had the Truma yesterday. Today you have to have the produce, and you make a declaration. This is connected to that. If by the time you come to making that identification, there is no produce left, even according to the Rav Meir, even according to Bereira, there was never Truma, and there was never Maisris. You chap? Because the link never happened. It's like Mikan lahaba lemafreya. Let's leave it with those words, and to be continued. I hope the recording came out.